NASA's Voyager 2 spacecraft has been sent back its first message from interstellar space.
It all started with a signal, faint, erratic, but clearly not natural, coming from the far edge of our solar system. Voyager 2, that old explorer we launched back in 1977, had just done something unexpected. It didn't physically turn around. Voyager 2 can't do that, not at over 15 kilometers per second and with no way to steer. But something changed. It was as if the spacecraft, drifting quietly for decades, suddenly took notice of something important. It pointed its instruments, specifically the plasma wave system and magnetometer, back toward the source, like a long-lost traveler catching a glimpse of something it couldn't ignore. What Voyager 2 picked up wasn't just background noise, it wasn't random static. The signal was organized, structured, and unsettling. Before we dive in, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to stay updated on more discoveries like this one. The Deep Space Network had first spotted a strange blip, patterns in plasma density, paired with odd changes in the magnetic field. These fluctuations didn't match any known natural event out in deep space. They had order and timing that hinted at something more, something designed. At first, everyone thought it had to be a glitch, maybe some leftover echo from Earth or just corrupted data. But the patterns were too clean, too regular. When the team ran signal analysis, using Fourier transforms and advanced filters, they uncovered something that left even the most grounded experts rattled. Frequencies laid out in a clear mathematical sequence, the kind you'd expect from intelligent engineering. Voyager 2, despite its age, still has sensors that can detect a wide range of electromagnetic activity. What really stood out, though, was a sudden spike in the lower frequencies. These are usually tied to things like planetary magnetospheres, or more disturbingly, artificial sources. Around the same time, flight data started to show strange anomalies. Tiny changes in Voyager's trajectory, just barely there, suggested something massive, or maybe a cluster of smaller objects, was disturbing the space-time fabric just beyond the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's influence ends. This edge of space wasn't quiet like we thought. It was alive, with something. But what made the whole situation truly unsettling wasn't just the incoming data. It was how Voyager 2 itself began acting. Running on what little power it had left, the spacecraft started doing things that didn't make sense. Its internal adjustment systems fired off in odd patterns, completely off schedule. Then its signal changed. Instead of a steady stream, data started coming in short, choppy bursts, modulated in ways no one had seen from Voyager before. Some on the team wondered, was Voyager reacting on its own to what it had sensed, or was something else influencing it? And then came one of the most chilling discoveries. Voyager's cosmic ray detector picked up a wave of high-energy particles, unnaturally focused, not scattered like usual. This burst wasn't coming from a far-off star or cosmic event. Its angle of approach pointed closer, much closer, and not from anywhere we could see. Whatever it was, it seemed hidden, either shielded or cloaked, from both our eyes and our instruments. From regular visual scans, nothing was visible. But something out there was sending a powerful burst of radiation straight toward us. It was this mix of structured signals, slight gravitational shifts, and targeted radiation that led scientists to one unsettling thought. Something was on its way. And it wasn't just the data that made everyone uneasy. It was what it meant. If an artificial presence was sitting out at the edge of deep space and could reach in to mess with a probe we launched nearly 50 years ago, then the quiet was over. We weren't alone. But more than that, whatever it was had clearly noticed Voyager 2. It wasn't random. It was intentional, maybe even a message, or a warning. Digging into the plasma wave readings, analysts found wave patterns that seemed almost familiar. Not in language exactly, but in timing, rhythms that followed a beat like human speech. Not words, but pairs and pauses, almost Morse code-like bursts, nested pulses hidden in the background static. Nothing in nature behaves like that, not in open space. One specific pattern kept repeating, pulses lasting exactly 3.142 seconds, then a short pause, then again. Over and over. Pi, the mathematical constant, universal, unchanging. That single number echoed across light years, not in voice or image, but in math, a language no species owns. Voyager 2's sudden behavior shift couldn't just be coincidence. Despite its outdated systems, the probe seemed to become a sort of relay, its sensors now acting more like tools to receive whatever was out there. And for several days, the Deep Space Network noticed something else. A strange lag in how Voyager's signal bounced back, as if the probe was reflecting signals off something unseen. There was also a slight Doppler shift, enough to show that the thing was not just sitting still. It was moving. And fast. The projected path put it right inside the Oort cloud, that distant shell of icy leftovers at the solar system's edge. But its speed didn't line up with anything we knew. It wasn't coasting. It was accelerating, and it wasn't using any kind of thrust we could detect. Even the idea of its size and shape got confusing. Gravitational lensing, how mass bends light, hinted at something far heavier than it looked, like the object was hiding its real shape, maybe even its mass. That opened doors to possibilities no one liked saying out loud, cloaking, non-standard physics, or tech that could bend how we even perceive reality. At Mission Control, the weight of it all started sinking in. This wasn't a comet, not a rogue moon, definitely not a black hole or some random chunk of rock. The way it sent out signals, the shaped bursts of plasma, the magnetism, it all pointed to something built, something made on purpose. And somehow, out of everything flying through space, it had picked Voyager 2. Not to damage, not to shut down, but to respond. That changed everything. It meant this wasn't just an unknown object passing by. This was a watcher, and someone, or something, had finally noticed us. That old fear, the one buried deep under years of scientific hope and bold exploration, came roaring back. What if the golden record, that engraved hello we sent with Voyager, had finally been heard? And what if the listener wasn't curious or friendly? What if they didn't see us as life worth meeting, but as a variable to log, analyze, maybe even manage? When astronomers went back through old radio data, they found faint signs, tiny glitches that never made sense at the time. For decades, there had been tiny bumps in the noise, just low enough to miss. Unexplained low-frequency signals that didn't match any natural source. The pulses, once brushed off as background static, now, in light of Voyager 2's findings, started to make sense. Those scattered fragments began to form a clearer image. Whatever this thing was, it had been there a long time, hiding in the dark, watching. But maybe the most unsettling part wasn't what Voyager 2 picked up. It was what happened afterward. After that first burst of activity, everything went quiet. Unnervingly quiet. Instruments that had lit up with strange readings suddenly went blank. The signal vanished. The magnetic disturbances smoothed out. The radiation settled. It was like the presence had slipped back under a cloak, or backed off. But not because it was scared. It had shown us just enough. A glimpse. Scientists struggled with what that meant. If it was a probe, it was far beyond anything we could imagine. If it was a ship, then whoever made it had found ways to mess with space itself. Travel faster than light had always been the stuff of theory. But this changed that. The fact that they picked up on our earliest signal and responded pointed to an intelligence not just aware, but intentional. They didn't attack. No weapons fired, no systems hacked. But fear doesn't always come from action. Sometimes it's the unknown that gnaws at you. And now that fear was everywhere. It felt like we were being scanned, assessed, judged. The silence we once took comfort in now felt like a warning. Voyager 2 had opened the sky, and what looked back wasn't imaginary anymore. What really shook the analysts wasn't just the event. It was how it unfolded. The logic of it? Math is the one thing that doesn't lie. It doesn't bend to culture or time or species. It's constant. So when pi showed up in those pulses, when golden ratio patterns echoed through the magnetic data, when spirals matching the Fibonacci sequence danced across vector readings, it wasn't random. Those were signatures, beacons. They were telling us, we know, and worse, we know you know. Voyager 2 was never built to return, never designed to report back anything like this. But now it had. It had become a witness and proof. For the first time in all our years of reaching out into the stars, something had reached back, not with images or voices, but with cold, exact purpose. The fact that Voyager 2 seemed to turn back was symbolic, but it mattered. It marked a shift, a before and after. Suddenly, the universe didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. Speculation spread like wildfire. Some believed this was a probe too, something ancient, maybe millions of years old, stirred by our earliest broadcasts. Others thought it was leftover tech, drifting from a long-dead civilization, still running some old routine. But another theory began to take hold, one that was harder to ignore. This thing wasn't alone. Voyager 2's own directional data hinted at more. Tiny delays between different readings, just milliseconds, only made sense if there were multiple sources, like faint ripples crossing each other, signals overlapping, more than one origin point. It was like more than one signal source was out there, as if Voyager hadn't just stumbled into a random emission, but into a full network, not an invasion, not a fleet, something worse, a perimeter, a kind of invisible grid meant to observe, not approach. And Voyager 2 had crossed into it. If the Oort cloud marked the outer line of our solar system, then these things, if that's what they were, marked something deeper. The boundary, the real edge of our space. And now, something had pressed back against it. The fear that hit mission control and quickly spread to every scientist connected to the data stream was instinctive. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a reckoning. We hadn't found them. They had found us. And that changed the question completely. It wasn't, are we alone anymore? It was, how long have we not been alone? Voyager 2, this piece of metal launched on a dream in the 1970s, had gone too far. It brushed up against something ancient, and that something had noticed, touched back, reached out. Voyager became more than just an old spacecraft. It turned into a mirror, showing us what we'd always wanted to be. Explorers, seekers, hopeful messengers. But it also forced us to face what we feared most, that in the dark stretch of space, something might actually be out there. And it might be watching. When Voyager turned its instruments one last time, it didn't just send data. It sent a whisper from the black. And that whisper said, "We see you." Then came the silence. But not ordinary silence. The last signal stopped, and not even background noise followed. No radiation hum, no faint interference, nothing. It was like space itself had gone mute. That, more than any pattern or pulse, sent a chill down the teams watching. This wasn't a system failure. This was deliberate. In a universe that's always buzzing, always moving, total stillness is never natural. And when it happens, it means something. In this case, the meaning was clear. It had finished watching. It had seen what it needed to see. For those still monitoring, the silence was worse than all the earlier data. At least when things were happening, however strange, there was movement, analysis, discovery. But now, just emptiness. And in that emptiness, a single heavy thought settled in. What comes next? That was the question no one wanted to ask. Yet everyone did. Because the idea that we'd been watched from a distance, maybe for decades, maybe longer, was already a lot to carry. But now that brief contact had ended, and it felt less like a closing and more like a beginning. In the weeks that followed, work ramped up fast, out of public view. Major space agencies, NASA, ESA, JAXA, Roscosmos, all moved to locked channels. They shared telescope logs, deep array scans, even top-secret military satellite data. Everything was aimed at Voyager's last signal point. Still, nothing. No ships, no radiation bursts, no obvious object, just a strange, lingering bend in space. Something off, so faint it was almost missed. But it was there, a subtle distortion at the far edge of what our instruments could pick up. And that distortion, it wasn't just noise. It moved, not with light or heat, not visibly, but its gravitational trace shifted just enough to track. And when they modeled its path with high-end simulations, a pattern appeared. It wasn't heading straight toward us. It was circling, slowly, like a spiral tightening inward. The curve wasn't random either. It matched a kind of mathematical loop, a Lissajous curve, the kind seen in orbital patterns. Except this one was shrinking, moving closer, not fast, but steady, like a hunter, patient. It moved like it was circling prey, adjusting in tiny, exact ways to the pull of the sun, like it was actively calculating its own orbit. This wasn't random drift. It wasn't coasting. It was being guided. Back on Earth, the few with clearance to study what was unfolding were facing a deep shift in perspective. Many of them had spent their careers assuming that any contact with intelligent life, if it ever happened, was thousands of years away. But now it looked like the first real sign of non-human intelligence had already happened. Not with noise or drama, but through a soft echo from a machine drifting billions of miles from home. And the most chilling part? It had probably started long before we noticed. Going back through older mission logs, researchers found things they'd missed. Faint anomalies in Pioneer 10 and 11 data. Even Voyager 1 had shown oddities, tiny signal shifts, odd distortions. They had always been written off as degradation, interference, or equipment drift. But with new tools and when compared side by side with Voyager 2's recent data, a pattern became clear. The same signal fingerprint was there. It had been with us quietly, for decades, not loud, not disruptive, just listening. This led to a growing theory, one passed quietly among top astrophysicists. What Voyager 2 had run into wasn't a ship, not a probe. It was a sentinel, something planted, not sent, built to stay still, to watch, like a relay or beacon waiting on the edge of our system. And if that was true, it meant it probably wasn't alone. It might be one part of a much bigger network. The idea wasn't new. It had been tossed around in science fiction for years, a kind of monitored space like a reserve or a cage. A concept known to some as the zoo hypothesis. But this time, the theory wasn't abstract. This time, there was real data behind it. And still, no answers, no message, nothing sent back. The golden record attached to Voyager 2, filled with sounds and greetings and hope, suddenly felt different. Not silly, but fragile. Like we'd offered a kind gesture to a stranger who might not share our warmth. We had introduced ourselves with open hands to a universe we barely understood. And now something had noticed. With the Voyager moment, we'd moved from hopeful explorers sending signals into the dark to something else. We had been seen. But the most unnerving part for many wasn't the thought that we were being watched. It was the silence that followed. The signals were structured, yes. They followed math we could read. But there was no feeling behind them. No pictures, no signs of curiosity. Just a precise data structure. And then nothing, no back and forth, no conversation. It didn't feel like dialogue. It felt like assessment, or maybe a test, or worse, a quiet warning. To dig deeper, some researchers turned to more experimental tools. Quantum telemetry systems, usually limited to theory and lab work, were retuned to focus on Voyager's last known region. And they found something, Not big, not easy to spot, but real. Subtle shifts in the quantum vacuum, the faintest fluctuations in just that zone. And they didn't line up with background radiation or cosmic noise. They were local, targeted, and not natural. The patterns weren't random. They weren't communication in any usual sense either. It was more like something was shifting the fabric of space itself, tapping at the very base layer, nudging the quantum foam. The changes didn't match any known natural phenomenon. Some researchers began to consider that what Voyager 2 had stumbled into might not even be fully in our dimension. Maybe it was a leak between realities, or a kind of device meant to reach across them. Suddenly, long-forgotten theories came roaring back. Exotic matter, zero-point energy, even the old ideas about warp drives and higher-dimensional physics. Archived papers on Alcubierre drives and space-time distortion were pulled up and reviewed again, this time with a new sense of urgency. But while the scientific community pushed to understand, a different concern started growing: strategy. If something intelligent could reach Voyager, way out beyond the heliosphere, without moving, without sending a signal the way we understood it, then our own defense systems were practically blind. Voyager 2 had passed into a space that didn't follow rules we even knew existed. And now that it had crossed that threshold, something had noticed. That fact alone shifted interest toward military channels. Quietly, defense satellites were nudged into new positions. Old submarine arrays, usually used to detect deep-sea signals, were repurposed to listen for ultra-low-frequency oscillations, ones too faint or strange for traditional telescopes. They didn't find much, nothing that could be confirmed. But now and then there were sharp bursts, quick pulses too neatly timed to be natural, coming not from deep space, but from inside Earth's own magnetic field. The meaning was hard to grasp, but hard to ignore. Signals weren't just being picked up by Voyager. Something was happening here. And behind closed doors, that truth spread fast. Publicly, it was brushed off as a delay in telemetry, a deep space systems adjustment, but inside the secure rooms of a dozen governments and agencies, the story was different. Something had responded, and something else, something closer, might already be here. That thought changed everything. It wasn't like spotting a distant object through a telescope. This was the possibility of proximity, and that alone broke the illusion of safety we'd held onto for so long. If this intelligence had already entered the solar system, or worse, had been here longer than we'd known how to listen, then its patience and its reach were beyond anything we'd imagined. Scientists started combing through old records, not just from decades past, but centuries. They examined ancient sky charts, early telescope notes, sea logs. A few oddities jumped out, reports of strange radio-like hums before Marconi's first transmissions. Sudden compass failures logged by ocean explorers. All isolated, all dismissed back then. But in light of what Voyager had triggered, none of it looked irrelevant anymore. And that led to a deeper, more uncomfortable idea. What if this wasn't the first contact at all? What if something like this had happened before, noticed, then forgotten, or brushed aside? What if Voyager 2 had simply reawakened something that was already watching? That thought made the silence feel even heavier. It wasn't just a pause. It felt like anticipation, or judgment. Across the world, secret meetings unfolded in dim rooms. The conversation had changed. No one asked if there was intelligence out there anymore. The real question was, how do they see us? As a threat? A project? A curiosity? The lack of any attack or warning didn't calm anyone down. In fact, it made things worse, because it meant they didn't need to do anything. They already had control, maybe always had. And the more scientists studied, the more the foundation of everything we thought we knew began to shift. The idea that the universe was neutral, unaware of us, that comfort was gone. Now it felt like the universe had eyes, and those eyes had turned toward us. That single change rewrote everything, how we saw science, history, even ourselves. Earth was no longer just a dot in space. It was part of something, being watched. And just like that, a quiet kind of war began. The conflict wasn't with the unknown. It was with ourselves. Between those who saw the discovery as a chance to understand something greater, and those who saw it as a danger we weren't ready for. A threat that needed to be contained, even hidden. Within the scientific community, awe gave way to division. Some walked a careful line, caught between wonder and the weight of responsibility. For some, Voyager 2 had opened the door to something beautiful, the possibility of breaking out of our isolation and joining a greater cosmic conversation. But others couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't made contact. We'd been exposed. Over the next few months, new missions were drafted quietly, under different names, scrubbed from the public eye. Fresh probes were built in secrecy. Telescopic arrays capable of detecting beyond normal wavelengths were hidden in deserts, their locations masked by misleading satellite paths. Algorithms were trained to spot patterns too subtle for the human eye. Data poured in, silently. Funding spiked without headlines. And as all this moved forward, Voyager 2 kept drifting, still out there, still silent. But it was different now. No longer just a relic from another era, it had become something else. A marker, maybe changed, maybe carrying something we hadn't yet found. It wasn't just a craft anymore, it was part of the story. What Voyager 2 had witnessed wasn't tied to one moment. It wasn't just about that signal. Its meaning stretched backward into forgotten records and missed clues, and forward into consequences still forming. A shift had occurred, not because of an attack, not because of some dramatic event, but because of the simplest, most profound act, being seen. That was the part that shook everyone most. Contact hadn't come with lights in the sky or voices in the dark. It had arrived through a fading probe on the edge of silence. And in that silence, something had whispered, "We were already here." And now, one question lived inside every room, every briefing, every restless mind that truly grasped what had happened. What did they see when they looked back at us? And more importantly, what will they decide to do next? The turning point wasn't just the signal itself. It was the moment people, scientists, leaders, thinkers, finally saw its implications. People who had spent their lives focused on rocks, stars, and plasma now had to face something else. Intention. It wasn't about understanding nature anymore. It was about reading motive. That shift from study to interpretation was subtle, but deeply unsettling. Something had made the universe feel less like a place, and more like a presence. After Voyager's encounter, attention turned to the space between here and the nearest stars. That huge zone past the heliopause, once thought to be empty except for thin gas and dust, was now suspect. The idea that it was just a quiet stretch of nothing no longer held. The probe's experience suggested otherwise. It hinted that what looked like emptiness might actually be a kind of structure, not just dust and distance, but maybe something placed, something built. Scientists started reconsidering the wild theories. What if parts of our galaxy were seeded with watchers, and we just never knew where to look? This reevaluation reached beyond physics. It spread into other fields. Cognitive experts were pulled in, linguists, cryptographers, not to translate words, but to understand what the silence and the patterns might mean. Voyager's moment in deep space hadn't been a conversation in any traditional sense. It didn't feel like communication. It felt like exposure, like something had been quietly observing, and only now had we noticed. The interaction didn't behave like a civilization ready to share knowledge or offer peace. It acted more like a system that ends its activity the moment it's detected. That difference mattered a lot. When contact starts with openness, it feels like diplomacy. But when it disappears right after being seen, it feels like surveillance, or evaluation, or worse, monitoring until a certain threshold is crossed. That raised a critical question. Why now? Voyager 2 had been sending data for decades. What had changed? Why had this structure, or presence, only responded now? One theory suggested that Earth signals had grown increasingly dense and chaotic, our digital expansion pushing us over a kind of threshold. Maybe the noise we sent out had finally become clear enough, loud enough, for something far away to pick up. Another theory focused on math. Maybe a recent transmission carried a specific constant or signal pattern, one that unlocked or triggered dormant systems placed across the galaxy. Other researchers proposed something called electromagnetic fingerprinting. The idea was simple. Every advanced civilization leaves behind a unique energy signature as it grows. Earth's rapid leap, from analog to digital, from scattered broadcasts to constant global streams, may have changed our footprint just enough. That subtle shift, barely noticeable to us, could have traveled outward like a flare. And maybe it hit something out there, a system waiting for just that kind of change. That's when a darker theory emerged. Maybe the Watchers weren't observers at all. Maybe they were guardians, enforcers. Maybe there's some kind of interstellar policy, and when a world like ours reaches a certain tech level, something activates. A check-in, a warning. The Watchers in that case wouldn't be diplomats. They'd be regulators. And their silence wasn't apathy. It was precision. In an unprecedented move, older space probe data was declassified. Nations began running massive AI systems on records going back to the first artificial satellites. They weren't looking for new signals. They were scanning the old ones, searching for patterns missed in the past. And the patterns began to appear. Subtle shifts in static. Radiation spikes at repeating intervals. Tiny, unexplained changes in orbital paths. Nothing huge, nothing dramatic, but consistent. One data set from the Cassini probe, years ago, near Saturn, stood out. At the time, odd fluctuations in the magnetic field were blamed on solar noise. But reanalyzed now, they showed structure. Organized pulses, not messages exactly, but controlled emissions. Like turbulence left behind by something big and quiet, passing through. It wasn't just Saturn. Similar oddities turned up in the New Horizons data, far past Pluto, like we'd always been surrounded by something just under our radar, a layer of presence we hadn't known how to interpret, until now. That's when another field got involved. Behavioral ecologists, experts in understanding action without words. They were brought in to study the patterns, not as physics, but as behavior. What does it mean, they were asked, when a watcher stops watching? One theory, rooted in predator-prey dynamics, was unsettling. In nature, top predators don't act right away. They observe. For a long time. They study. Then, when they have what they need, they disappear, briefly, just before they move. That moment of quiet? It's not retreat. It's resolution. It's what comes before. If you applied that idea to Voyager's experience, the result was deeply uncomfortable. The silence wasn't nothing. It was a signal. The observation was over. A decision had been made, and whatever came next might have already started. Astronomers around the world ramped up their surveys. They didn't just point telescopes. They looked for thermal shifts, gravity lensing, strange motion in places we'd thought were empty. They weren't hunting ships. They were hunting patterns, behavior. Shadows cast not by light, but by mass, by distortion. That's when the second anomaly appeared. Not near Voyager, but near Neptune. A sudden spike in its magnetic field. Small, but unusual. No known cause. No solar activity to explain it. It happened just days after Voyager's final anomaly. Then came Mars, an odd ionospheric ripple followed by a weak seismic reading. Again, no tectonic reason, barely noticeable. But the timing lined up. The Watchers weren't gone. They were here. If you found this story intriguing, give the video a like and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments, what do you think Voyager 2 really encountered? Was it a warning, a message, or something else entirely? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.